Good afternoon, boys and girls and families. Thank you for joining us for afternoon story time. I say us, my dog Marley is sleeping again. He kind of does that in the afternoon. But thank you for joining us for afternoon story time. I was looking for a different type of book to read today. And I said, well, let's see, I've read fiction books. I've read some nonfiction books. I wonder if I have any biographies. Now, the books that I took from the library were all brand new or books to repair. So I found a few, but I found one today I think you're going to enjoy. In fact, we're going to be reading it for the next few days. It's a book in the Who Was series. And are you ready for this? Who was Stan Lee? Bam, pow! Let's check out this book of Stan Lee's life. How did he get into the comics and how did he make such wonderful movies? Let's find out. So this book is written by Geoff Edgers and illustrated by John Hinderliter, Penguin Workshops Publishing. We have, many chapters here, so let's see how many I can do in, 10 minutes or so, okay? Our first chapter, Who Was Stan Lee? Martin Goodman, the publisher of Timely Comics in New York City, didn't know what to do with the teenager, but the boy was his wife's cousin, and she had asked Goodman to hire him. So, just like that, Stanley Martin Lieber was working in the middle of the golden age of comics. As a boy, Stan spent hours curled up with comic books. Now, he was part of that world. We have a few pictures throughout our book. Superheroes were everywhere at Timely Comics. The Human Torch fought bad guys with fire. Namor the Submariner could fly and breathe underwater. And he was as strong as 1,000 men. Captain America began life as a scrawny art student, but turned into a superhero after the U.S. government recruited him for the Super Soldier Project. At first, Stan kept to himself. The artists at Timely were a little scary. They were all older, they smoked big cigars, and yelled at each other all day long. What was there for a 17-year-old kid from the Bronx to do? Well, young Stanley Lieber ran to the deli for sandwiches at lunchtime and made sure the artist inkwells were full. But he wasn't going to waste a lifetime fetching coffee and answering phones. He had dreams. He was a writer. He wanted to tell stories and maybe someday write the great American novel. One day, two of Timely's comics top managers both got angry and quit their jobs. Mr. Goodman needed someone to run the office while he was taking naps or playing golf. He called Stan over and offered him his job. That's when Stanley Lieber became Stan Lee. In the next half century, he would help create some of America's most famous superheroes, including Spider-Man, Iron Man, Hulk, and the X-Men. He wasn't the only person who made comic books for a living, but Stan Lee was the best. And that was our introduction chapter on Who was Stan Lee. Here is chapter 1, Growing Up. Stanley Lieber was born on December 28, 1922 in New York City. His father Jack and mother Celia were immigrants from Romania who lived in a tiny apartment. And like millions of people, they had come to the United States with dreams of a better life. They wanted to start a family and buy a house. Jack got a job cutting fabric at a dress factory. He was paid very little and worked long hours. Celia stayed home and took care of Stan. And by the time Stanley was 6 years old, the Great Depression had begun. Millions of people lost their jobs, including Stan's father. Now the family struggled to pay bills. Jack and Celia began to argue. Stan worried whenever his parents argued. He loved his parents, and he didn't want them to fight. The Lieber family moved to an even smaller apartment. Jack and Celia had to sleep on a cot in the living room, and there was only one tiny window, and it faced a brick wall. Stan's mother wanted him to finish school quickly so he could go to work to help the family. She pushed Stan to study hard, and he did. He ended up skipping a few grades, which meant that he was always the youngest in his class. He sometimes struggled to make friends. And here's the family there, Jack and Celia and Stan in their tiny apartment. Stan's favorite teacher was Leon B. Ginsberg, Jr. Mr. Ginsberg had a great sense of humor and always told a funny story to make his point. Stan learned that people remembered stories if they are told with a sense of humor. As a boy, Stan loved to write. He also loved to read, even if it was just the label of a ketchup bottle on the kitchen table. What have I told you, boys and girls? Read anything, right? Even your food products. In fact, Stan always had a book or magazine with him at meals. The Hardy Boys was one of his favorite book series. Two adventurous brothers, Frank and Joe Hardy, were the heroes of the books. Stan also loved to draw. He wasn't the best artist, but that didn't matter. Drawing helped Stan tell his stories. Well, during the summers, many New York boys went to camps outside the city. But the Liebers couldn't afford to send Stan away to camp. Instead, Sam stayed home and read. Stan's mother even bought him a stand to keep his books upright on the table while he ate. Oh, good job, Mom. Fueling his interest of reading. Whenever he could afford a ticket, Stan loved to go to the movies. There were 5 theaters to choose from near his apartment. They showed movies like Frankenstein and Sherlock Holmes and King Kong. Stan daydreamed of being like Errol Flynn, the handsome actor who starred as Robin Hood. When Stan was 9, his brother Larry was born. As Stan got older, the family really needed him to pitch in and get a job. Here he is reading at the kitchen table while he's eating. And there's his little brother, Larry. Stan was not afraid of hard work. He took any job he could get. He wrote for a news company. He delivered sandwiches, and he worked in an office of a company that made pants. Even as he worked to help his family, Stan kept writing, and he was getting good at it. A local newspaper sponsored a writing contest, and Stan won so many times the newspaper asked him to stop entering. They wanted someone else to have a chance to win, but the newspaper editor also praised Stan and urged him to do something with his talent. That kind of encouragement meant a lot. Stan would never forget it. So chapter 2, Becoming Stan Lee. Ooh. And here he is here. And let's see how he became Stan Lee. In 1939, when Stan was just 16, he graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School. Many kids his age were thinking about college. Not Stan. He needed to keep working. With the help of his cousin Gene, he got a job at Timely Comics, a publishing company run by Martin Goodman. Mr. Goodman barely knew Stan. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Goodman asked Stan when he showed up for work. Was Mr. Goodman joking? Had Jean forgotten to mention Stan to her husband? He never got a chance to find out. He was too busy. Timely published more than 24 magazines out of its Manhattan offices. Some featured adventure stories set in the Old West. Others were about science and health. Stan was assigned to Timely's comics department. Some department, Stan joked. It was Joe and Jack. Joe was Joe Simon. He was the top editor, the man in charge of all the words on the page. Jack was Jack Kirby. He was the best artist at Timely. And these 2 men were big influences on Stan. But they weren't friendly. When Stan first arrived, they barely looked up when they talked to him. In those first days on the job, Stan worked as a gopher, somebody who does whatever the boss needs. Though he was paid only $8 a week, Stan didn't mind. He was proud to be working at Timely. There are those Joe and Jack. Stan commuted every day from the Bronx down to Timely's offices on 42nd Street. The room Joe and Jack worked in was nothing special. Jack would sit at his drawing board, Joe would pace around the room, and Stan sometimes joked that he couldn't see them through all the cigar smoke. Well, at that time, there was fierce competition from other comic book companies. DC Comics had created Superman and Batman. Timely's two superheroes were less famous. The Human Torch was an android created in a lab. He had the power to shoot fire from his hands. He could suddenly burst into flames. So here's the people at work here. Oh, look at that. Ha ha! But he could not always control those flames. The submariner had an even bigger problem. He was the son of a human sea captain and a princess from Atlantis, and he didn't seem to like humans at all. In 1940, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby created Captain America for Timely Comics. World War II was raging in Europe, and Simon and Kirby were horrified by what they had heard about Adolf Hitler. Captain America's mission was to fight Nazi Germany. He wore a red, white, and blue costume, the same colors as the American flag. He carried a shield that could stop bullets. The first issue was a huge success. It sold 1 million copies. Superman had competition. That's when Stan got a chance to do more than answer phones. One day, Joe Simon called Stan over, and he asked if Stan would be able to write a story for a new issue of Captain America. Stan was thrilled. He turned in a story called Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge. Nobody said much about his first story, and Stan didn't mind. All that mattered was that Stan got assigned another story right away. After the Traitor's Revenge, Stan began to write more, and as he wrote, he decided to use a pen name instead of his real name. He considered Headline Hunter, Foreign Correspondent, Stan Martin, and even, I think it's Stan Martin, and even Niels Nats, which was almost Stan Lee, spelled backward. Stan didn't want to use his full name, Stanley Lieber. I was saving that for the great American novel, he joked later, which I never wrote. Finally, he settled on a permanent pen name, Stan Lee. Both his names cut in half. And there he is, testing out his signature. Well, boys and girls, that's all the time that we have this time. Tune in next time for Chapter 3, The Teenager Takes Over. Boys and girls, thanks for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Okay, get out in this sunshine, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.